Bum bum bottom 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 bum bum
doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da da da
You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson.
And I'm Brad Gullickson.
And each month we evaluate a different iconic romance within the four-color realm. And in this episode, nothing is real. No, everything is real. I mean, you won't believe what's out there. Brad.
Huh?
I killed someone.
What?
Then I did it again. But don't worry, it was all normal in our creator corner.
Oh.
We're talking to Tom King and going full spoilers into Helen of Wyndhorn from Dark Horse Comics.
This is another one of those episodes where you imagine happening or you dream of happening the second you finish reading the first issue. We've been lucky to have Tom on the podcast several times before this one. And this episode is a little bit like a sequel to our conversation with him about Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. Obviously, because it is a spiritual sequel to that book. It's a return to the collaboration that he had with Bilquis Evely, Matheus Lopes, and Clayton Cowles.
Dream team.
But also because this episode feels as if it starts immediately after the last one ended. The second we hit off on that record session, it feels like the moment we hit record on this one, it's like no time has passed.
And we have more inside jokes with him than ever. Yeah. And he decided that this is the conversation where he was going to work them all in.
Yeah. And some of them you will understand and some of them you won't unless you've listened to our like basically all of our previous Tom King episodes. He continues to mock me for not booking him one of his earliest Barnes & Noble signings when I was a manager at the Clarendon store.
And now he knows that I teach piano lessons and sing weddings and funerals locally, and so that pops into the conversation a couple of times.
I've already edited the audio, and I think it's a tremendously fun conversation. Yes, it does start in medias res for our listeners, because Tom enters the Zoom room, we start talking casually, and then suddenly he's giving away the goods.
Tom, you can't just start talking about Conan the Barbarian like it doesn't matter.
Right.
That it's not what the listeners are here for.
So, I started to panic. I was just like, hit record. There's going to be no welcome to Comic Book Couples Counseling Talk. We're just having a conversation about Conan the Barbarian.
We have an open door policy with Tom. We just keep a toothbrush.
Yeah, and, we also can't take his time for granted these days. His schedule right now is insane with Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow filming and Lanterns over at Max. He's a very busy dude, and we didn't have this conversation until night had fallen. The next day was practically dawning, very late at night.
But I feel like that's the right time to talk about Helen of Wyndhorn. Like, it's a story about legends. I just think about Helen and Lilith snuggled up in bed while Helen excitedly tries to tell her of all of her adventures and how bloody her axes got.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this episode to finally be here. It is a full spoilers conversation, so if you have not read Helen of Wyndhorn, you need to do so. At the same time, it's very thematically forward in its discussion, so I don't
if you're a plot guy, I don't feel like we go too much into plot.
Yeah. It depends on how spoiler sensitive it is. I don't know why I'm always so defensive when I give this warning, but I am.
Everyone is entitled to their own boundaries around spoilers and their own ethics around spoilers. We don't want to offend anybody. Helen of Wyndhorn is one of those stories that, especially upon second reading, it immediately influenced my psychology and my behavior. It's kind of like when you go see a Fast and Furious movie and then you're driving out of the parking lot and you're zip, zip. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but you're very impressionable.
I am. And it'll come up in this conversation. Coming out of that story, my feelers are open for the opportunity to be a hero in my own way. And it happened just recently, and I am like so proud of myself. I just had another student recital. All of my young pianists and singers killed it.
They sure did.
And
Congratulations.
when you do a good job and you're really proud of yourself, what do you deserve? Tacos. So we went to Senior Ramon's, which is like a local spot, and it is delicious.
Yeah.
But it's small.
You were craving margaritas. Like, how do you celebrate completing 2 months of buildup and planning of your recital?
And practicing and all this stuff.
Margaritas.
Oh, yeah. I like my adult beverages like I like myself. Salty and a little tart. Am I right? But the place is very small. And there was this guy who was aggressively hitting on the woman who worked there, to the point where it was just so uncomfortable. He was doing the thing where you're like, well, how do you say this in Spanish? How do you say that in Spanish? These are all of the Spanish-speaking countries I've gone to. Apparently he was some kind of like hiker guy, like nature guy, as you could tell by his orange pants. I don't know why they all wear that.
I had my back to him. I was only absorbing the audio. You were getting the whole picture.
And I was riveted.
Yes.
I could not look away. And so finally he started talking about like, oh man, this is the best al pastor I've ever had. And so I interject and I go like, yeah, this place is the best. And he's like, oh, what do you like to get? I'm like, well, I only order vegetarian. So I get the 3 things that are vegetarian. And Brad is like, with his eyes like, what are you doing? Why are you inserting yourself into this awkwardness? And so I told Brad this thing. And
afterwards
in the car.
And we ended up having like a really long conversation with this guy about like, I'm a big fan of the birria and he was a big fan of the El Pastor. And we both agreed that the next time we went to Senior Ramon's, we would get the other person's favorite item.
And the key thing is once we inserted ourselves in the conversation, that man left.
But I wasn't sure what you were doing. And when we left and we got in the car, I was like, what was that all about? Why did you force me into this really awkward exchange with this carefree character?
Because I'm a hero, that's why. And so I feel like this is a public service announcement. I've been the retail person who has been receiving too much laser-like, unwelcome attention at work. And I've come up with, I think, a pretty foolproof strategy for any onlooker to diffuse the situation. If there is no imminent danger, if it is just awkwardness, and you see some poor retail worker being cornered by a fawning customer, you have every right to walk over there and take a one-direction conversation and turn it into a two-direction conversation. So in our situation, we went in there and we took what she was receiving 100% of his attention. Now all of a sudden she's receiving a third of his attention. And then when you reach a natural end to that conversation, you start walking away, and that creates a kind of social suction to pull that person away from the retail worker so that they can get back to work.
Yeah.
I believe in this.
No, I love it. I love it. I wish I had been as cognizant of what was going on. I mean, look, I understood that this guy was macking on this person aggressively, and I was like, ugh, that's awkward. I got to get out of here. Like, that was my response because I was not a hero. I did not get the lesson from Helen of Wyndhorn that you got. But now, you know, going through that experience and then talking to you afterwards in the car, I would like to, insert and diffuse where I can. And that is something that I did on the regular when I was a Barnes & Noble manager.
Yeah.
I would rescue my employees all the time. I just never considered to do it for like normal citizens, you know, my neighbors. But those are like the small acts of heroism that I think we really should be focusing on right now, especially.
Not all heroes wear capes, but some heroes are full of tacos.
Man, Senior Ramon, if you're ever in Reston, Virginia, you gotta go and get the birria. Now, the whole reason we're having this conversation with Tom is because Helen of Wyndhorn is out now in a glorious hardcover from Dark Horse Comics.
It's so pretty.
And I imagine the same thing's going to happen to Helen that happened to Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. Once those comics were collected in a really nice hardcover, a bunch of new readers discovered it. So I'm very eager to witness the birth of a much larger Helen of Wyndhorn fandom.
I can't wait to finally commune with my fellow Helen heads.
Helen heads?
Yeah, that's what they're called.
Okay.
That's what I'm calling them. And I'm the president of the fan club, the
Okay.
Helen Heads fan club.
Now, if you haven't read Helen of Wyndhorn and you're not spoiler phobic and you have found yourself listening to this episode of Comic Book Couples Counseling, here's a quick little plot synopsis of the book. The story begins with a young biographer named Thomas interviewing an older woman named Lilith about her connection to a Robert E. Howard-like author named C.K. Cole, who died tragically by suicide. The comic then flashes back into Lilith's history when she is hired by Cole's father, Barnabas, to retrieve his granddaughter, Helen, C.K. Cole's daughter. And that is no easy mission because Helen is devastated. She is struck down by an immense grief and being dragged back to her grandfather's estate, the Wyndhorn house, is not terribly appealing. Of course, as we see in the first issue, Wyndhorn rests on the edge of a wood that may take travelers to another area, and maybe those stories that C.K. Cole wrote about weren't so much fiction.
Helen discovers that her family legacy exists in this fantasy world of violence and beasts and magic. And in that place, she finds self-worth and purpose and bravery. And she never lets go of her reverence for her mad author father. But she deepens her relationship with herself, I would say. It's a story about grief. It's a story about self-discovery. It's a story about finding your place in the world. And we do have to give a trigger warning. Not only is the topic of suicide one of the instigators of the story, but it's also one of the main themes of the story. We do briefly mention the method of C.K. Cole's death, and we also talk about suicidal ideation in general. So if that is not conducive to your journey where you are at today, please skip this story, please skip this conversation, and take good care of yourself. There are many other comics and many other episodes for you to enjoy.
And if Tom were here right now, he would also want to remind us that this story is a ton of fun.
Yes.
There's so much swashbuckling adventure happening here. But of course, it's Comic Book Couples Counseling, so we get heavy
real.
quick.
We get real. Also, Lilith is the frickin' coolest as well.
Don't spoil too much.
Okay,
Let's talk about that.
She's
on
a
the
mentor. She's an
other
educator.
Side of this conversation.
Okay. Is that real? Your 5-year-old came up with the name Othan?
Yes, that's totally real. He came up with it as the bad guy in Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. And if you look close, I think Othan makes one background appearance. He's the head of the pirates in issue 7. His name is Othan. I'm not 100% sure if it didn't make the final cut, because there was, I think we've talked about before, there was an issue that I took out that got cut, issue 6. That the editor did not like. I turned it in and said you have to start over, and then I rewrote issue 6 very quickly, and it became everybody's favorite issue. So I should write everything in one day. But but that was an all Othan issue. So Othan got put on the cutting floor, and then I think there's just like a little background thing. So then I reused Othan for this, thinking that someone would stop me at some point because it's way close to Conan.
I think that is what makes it work.
Yeah, I mean, when you read this book, I just assume that you grew up a big Robert E. Howard person.
You would be wrong. I did not grow up a big Robert E. Howard person. I came to him late in my nerd career, although this book comes obviously directly from inspiration. As a kid, when I read comics, and I was obviously a huge comic nerd, as you guys were, but I was so ridiculously, stupidly Marvel and DC. Like even Image was too indie for me. I'm like, who is this Rob Liefeld who thinks he's cooler than me? You know, like I was like, if it wasn't in continuity of Marvel and DC, it really didn't venture out. There were like some minor exceptions for like ElfQuest, and it's hard to think of others. But so I didn't go outside into sort of the Conan land. I mean, I was a nerdy kid, so I read like Dragonlance books and those kind of things. But Conan was a little more sophisticated than I think my tastes at 13 years old. I don't think I would understand it. And the movie is I'm just young enough. I missed the movie. I think the second one was out. I can kind of vaguely remember how badly that was received as a child.
Yeah, the second one's terrible. We actually just screened the original 1982 movie at the Alamo Drafthouse in Winchester. Hadn't seen it in a while, and man, we had a great time, and the crowd ate it up.
Oh, that's super good. Yeah, I watched that as an adult. I didn't realize, but yeah, man, it's super artsy fartsy. Like people think, like when I was a kid, the way I knew Conan first was through UHF and Weird Al Yankovic doing Conan the Librarian. Yep. Was like my introduction to Conan. And so when you see that movie and you're like, oh my God, this is John Milius being so artsy fartsy in making this Conan film. It really holds up. It's like it's deep and dark and has interesting themes and Schwarzenegger's pretty damn good. Yeah,
he's great. He's great. The production design is Ron Cobb, and like William Stout was Ron Cobb's assistant at the time. So it just looks freaking rad.
And I can't tell you how many times in my life I have worked out and thought, I'm not doing this efficiently. And then I think, but Conan just pushed that thing around and around. And that's all he did for 30 years. And he ended up looking like Schwarzenegger. So if I just keep doing something, it'll happen.
So then, you get off of Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, and you and Bilquis and Matheus, still want to rock and roll with a project. When did you realize that this was going to be the world that you all would be exploring?
So three things collided, and I'll try to go fast through them. Number one, I read some article in like Back Issue magazine on Conan comics. I'm like, Roy Thomas Conan comics, and it was like listed like the 100 top ones. And I went on Amazon, ordered as many as I could, and I just started reading. I was like, I love this. This is so awesome. And I got totally involved in them, and then I started reading the original books. And I was like, these are amazing. It's one of those things where you've heard it's stupid, but it turns out to be really interesting and cool, and deep. And then you learn about his life, and you're like, wow, that is very bizarre that he sort of changed all of literature and died at the age of 30 when he killed himself, and nobody really kind of understands why. And so that was happening. Simultaneous to that, I saw, oh my God, a Twitter thread from when I used to read Twitter.
R.I.P.
Yeah, R.I.P. Right. Which was like someone was listing, like it was a guy who was listing all like the bizarre pulp covers from old epic romances, Gothic romances, and I had this is another bizarre loop, like weird part of our pop culture. Then this like 60s, 70s, and 80s, they produced dozens and dozens, thousands and thousands of books that all had basically the same cover, which was a young woman running away from a Gothic house. And I was obsessed. I was like, that is a bizarre thing. This is over and over and over again. And whenever I see something that's like super popular like that, that's kind of disappeared. So I started digging into that, and I reread the Bronte sisters. I don't know. I was like, what is Gothic romance? I once found out, I figured it out. And so that was going on. So that's like peanut butter and chocolate. And then at the same time, I was like, Bilquis, whatever you want to do, I'll do anything. You're artist. I think she's just the best artist in comics. And I was like, whatever you want. And she sent me a mood board, and it was all kind of like 1930s and 40s kind of movie stars mixed with a little bit of, kind of Wally-Wood space people, and some, kind of Alex Raymond type of art, kind of very scratchy kind of art. And she's like, something like this. So with little fantasy elements, I was like, okay, so it's like a retro fantasy thing. And then I put together, I was like, so I'm going to do something with Conan and Wuthering Heights. And I shoved them together. And that's a very long story of how this book became what it is.
It makes perfect sense, though. To me, Helen of Wyndhorn is such like a perfect Disney princess story for adults. This idea that somewhere you are like, you had no idea, you were so
below ordinary, and then all of a sudden you discover, oh, I am a princess and I am a warrior and I am so extraordinarily special. I don't know what the question is.
No, yeah, that all that stuff is there, and it also it's sort of blended with this idea of this of what is the standard gothic romance plot, which is like woman living an ordinary life gets some message that calls her into an old kind of very haunted house. If anyone's seen the movie Rebecca by Hitchcock, that's like a classic,
one of my favorites, actually.
Classic version of it. Yeah, exactly. And in that house, there's a man there who's at first very rude to her, and then but in exploring the house, it all takes you from Pride and Prejudice, the Mr. Darcy version, where she explores a house and realizes that the person who seems grumpy is actually loving, and then through that they sort of find romance. So I was riffing on that. If someone's sort of called to a house that's incredible, that's weird, that has a grumpy owner, but instead of doing a romance, I made it sort of this about this granddaughter and grandfather and bonding over the generation, stealing obviously from Howard's own life, where he was a pulp writer who killed himself and nobody kind of understands why. He's at his mother's funeral and just walked to his car and shot himself in the head. Or not, yeah. And I don't think it was a funeral. I think she just like passed away in her deathbed. He walked to the car and shot himself in the head.
Did you see the movie The Whole Wide World? Where
I know it exists. Yeah, I know it exists. They purposely did not watch it because I thought it would infect the book. So but I know it's there.
So for me though, what takes Helen of Wyndhorn to the next level is the device of recording Lilith's story.
Yeah.
And then seeing how that story is recorded onto these tapes. These tapes are then never used in the biography of C.K. Cole, and then they get passed around and forgotten at a garage sale until maybe somebody actually listens to them after purchasing them. When did that element come into it?
So that's stolen from the Brontes. That's me. That's the chocolates of the peanut butter. If Wuthering Heights being sort of the most extreme version of that, but like Jane Eyre, and then there's the third one that the third sister wrote. And they're all WH, which is why it's Helen of Wyndhorn. Wuthering Heights, Wyndhorn. Yeah, so clever. And if you've read that book, it is a little bit of a I don't know what you call it, like a Russian doll kind of narrative, where it's told by a man who meets a person in the bar who then talks about their maid who was in the Wuthering House story. Then halfway through it switches to another narrator who also heard the story, and so it's like 3 levels removed from sort of your initial narrator. And this book was designed in the very beginning to be, I knew Supergirl was something special, and I wanted people who had read Supergirl to just have more of it, and I think I just wanted to make more of it when I ended Supergirl. So I used the same sort of, they called I don't know, I forget the technical term, but like the Great Gatsby narration, where you tell a story of a main character from a side character's point of view. And I wanted to use that, just like in Wuthering Heights is that kind of book. So I took that idea. They put 3 layers on it, and I turned it into 6 layers and just kind of layered it some more and more and more, because it was all, I mean, I'm giving this away, but it's just a metaphor for when you're trying to decide someone's suicide, why someone killed themselves. You never sort of discover it. There's always so many layers in between. And that was kind of, I was trying to talk about that. You can never kind of know someone on that level that you want to know them to explain why they could die. And that was the idea, to sort of pull it back.
Using suicide in a story, it can't, obviously you don't use it lightly. And I do think that it's an important topic.
Oh, I meant it entirely as a joke.
It's hilarious. No.
Yes. That's the punchline.
But like using suicide as an establishment of stakes, where it's like find your purpose or die. What are the considerations you take because like suicide is a topic that you tackle in a lot of stories. And why does it loom in the center of your imagination in such a way?
I mean, I think there's a surface reason, probably. Like, I think I discovered literature. I don't know if you call it literature. Like, I was a kid who read a ton as a kid, but like when I remember very specifically being like 13, 14, 9th grade, and someone giving and being assigned, before I started high school, J.D. Salinger's 9 stories. And the first story was like a present for banana fish or something. There's a very famous first story. And And it's a beautiful story about a man and his a boy and his uncle, and they talk. They have an adventure on the beach, and then it ends. And for no reason at all, the uncle just kills himself. And I just remember that hitting me so hard as a kid, and I think that just got ingrained into my mind. And so combine that. So fast forward to like when you're in college and you're reading like Heidegger and you're doing your philosophy kind of stuff, and Heidegger's theory is sort of what makes man different than any other human being is that they have the ability to kill themselves. Like that's like my dog never thinks of killing themselves. So that every single day you choose the day you're living because you could have chosen otherwise. So despite whatever circumstances you're in, you feel like this is the most horrible thing, you chose to be there. That's extreme. And obviously Heidegger was a Nazi, so he had to take this stuff with a grain of salt, but that did at the time like hit me like a train bridge. And of course I'm avoiding talking about sort of the personal side of this, mostly because my kids are in the next room.
Yeah. I mean, I'll talk about my personal side. Like, I went through a really terrible bout of depression, like when I was like a teenager and then going into being a young adult. And like one of my like themes that I would say all the time was like, people are taking my time. You know what I mean? Where I'm just like, I have to go to school all day, and then, I'm so tired, and then I just go to sleep, and then when I wake up and I have to go back to school, or I have to meet other people's expectations, and I just feel like and like, so when we meet Helen and her father, who was her whole world, but also kind of taught her this kind of like nihilistic existence, has killed himself, and she is just listless in her life. Like, I found that extremely relatable. This idea of, what am I supposed to be doing if I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's at the core of that character, is that she was raised with someone who nihilistic is almost the perfect way to put it. I don't think I'm going to get it better than you got it. But yeah, the idea that she was raised with someone who didn't give a fuck, who was like, you want to be educated, get educated. You want to be educated, don't get educated. I just want to get drunk and get through the day. And I write to drink, and that's the way we're going to live. And if we can't pay, we run away. And almost a valueless person, which is not to say a bad person. It's an Epicurean. There's beauty in that. But those are the values that she was sort of raised with. And the reason, of course, a lot of those people who say they don't care the most are the people that do care the most. And that's, of course, what kills him, is that, what he was doing that whole time when he said he didn't care, he was actually caring very deeply about all that stuff until it kind of crushed him. That sort of level of denial finally crushed him. So, and that's her discovery, is that, she needs to believe in something. She needs to connect with people, the things her father denied her.
Your stories are often like where you get these dramatic polar opposites, where we get CK, who is, life is beautiful when nothing matters, and there's a freedom to that, and there's a romance to that, and Helen always felt loved, and she always felt like her dad was like this magical person, and that his world was words. And then she has Barnabas, who's like, warriors don't need words, words don't matter, actions matter. And of course, like, the truth in a Tom King story, and the truth in the world is like, well, we're all just actually just stuck in this uncomfortable middle place where you're uncomfortable because both things are true, and you don't feel good.
Wait, but this book has a happy ending.
It does.
It's a little bit Disney. I think you're right at the beginning. There's that Disney element to it. It's, yeah. There's epiphany. There's solace. There's love at the end. If not total discovery. No. I agree with you. There's no. There's no. I don't believe in easy answers. I mean, I believe in living life a day at a time and all that stuff. So you find that in all my books. I try to put people who say morals into things at the very end, but then I contradict them with where I've gone along the way, because I don't think I believe in those kind of morals. So, but yeah. I mean, that's what they both have to discover through the whole thing, is both of them are completely disconnected people. They don't believe, they don't believe in sort of I don't know, for lack of a better term, in love. They don't believe in sort of caring about another person, because they both lost the one person they cared for. It just happens to be they lost the same person. They have no idea how to talk about that fact. That there's this sort of ghost that separates them, and that's what the book is. It's about these two people who have this ghost between them, learning to love one another because they loved him. That sounds so rote. I'm sorry.
No, but like you go to the edge of this thing that I'm about to say, where Helen, her love of her father, her love of her father's words, it is all magical. But then she discovers that the things that her father were writing about is actually true. He did experience those stories. And so now her dad isn't just this person of great imagination, he is a chronicler. And the story itself is being chronicled. And your stories have also frequently been about stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think to her that her father was so dismissive of those stories that he always said, this is pulp bullshit. This is how I earn a living. When I first got into comics, the first thing I couldn't. Well, sorry. First got into writing. I've told this story before, so I apologize if you heard. But like, I was too precious. Like, I would write and I'm like, oh, it's not the perfect sentence. This isn't Hemingway. I'd throw it out. And then I read this book about early pulp writers and how they were just writing for money. That they did not care that this stuff was going to be, shat on by birds the next day. They're just like, I got to make rent, so I have to write this story. And that was totally inspiring to me. And I was like, I admire those people more than I admire people looking for a complete sentence. They're actually like, I don't know, just blue collar about it. And I think that's the way her father always portrayed. He's like, I don't give a fuck about any of this stuff. I'm putting the wool over. So when she discovers that the magic world is real, she starts to see, it's an insight into her father that he was kind of dismissing something that he actually cared about. It's the beginning of the breakdown. It's the beginning of her, realizing that there was, her father taught her whole life not to give a fuck about anything, and it turns out he gave a fuck about so many things. And I think her finding out it's real is that sort of that first step in that direction. Why it's so magical and wonderful to her, it being real. I think she's just someone who doesn't really like. She doesn't like the real world. I think the real world disappointed her because she found her father hanging from a noose in the real, or hanging from a belt in the real world.
I wonder if CK also, it added to his feeling like a fraud because he was essentially plagiarizing his own life. Like
100%.
It didn't come from his imagination. It was something that came.
He was stealing something.
Yeah.
Which is why, he treated it as trash, but it's actually shame. I think that's exactly it. Like, he didn't want to tell her that I'm not making this up. Like it's he would rather just drink it away and try to forget the fact that this is. But I mean, again, there's something like, he did have the daughter. He didn't try to kill himself. He did raise her. He had to make that money, and the only way he could make that money was to do something he probably didn't want to do, which was to scrape these stories out of him. I remember when my career was utterly on the skids after my first novel failed, mostly because you wouldn't sell it at your Barnes and Noble.
That's right.
Signing.
Correct.
And I had another idea, Vertigo, get thrown out. And I was like, I have nothing left. Like, that nobody's going to hire me. And it was at that point that I was like, all right. And I did the pitch to the Vertigo editors. Like, I was in a war. I'll write about the war. I was like, it felt so cheap to write about the war and to be like, and I was like, and the fact that I just didn't want to use I was in the CIA to be like a writer. I don't know. It felt like I was both betraying my former colleagues and cheapening myself. I can't really describe it, but I was like, it's either this or I have to go apply to Brad to work at the Barnes and Noble, and I know he doesn't like me. So there's something noble in desperation. At least I like to think of it, and that's how Sheriff of Babylon got born.
There's something in Lilith's story that I really love. Well, it's in both Helen and Lilith's story, this theme of like, okay, well, if you work through the thing that you're afraid of, and then you hit the place where you're not afraid anymore, and you're just doing what you believe in, and you're not afraid, like, then you have found your purpose, where it's just like, you have to swim into the ocean to like find your wave, and then your wave is just carrying you, I guess, is a metaphor that I just used for no reason.
No, I like it. I like that.
But like,
It's a great
is
metaphor.
selling out your story was a way of you getting through the choppiness to ride the wave of your purpose, perhaps.
I mean, I hope so. I mean, I hope so for me, and I hope so for Helen. I hope so for Lilith. That's. I mean, we all make our lives out of small desperations, right?
Mm-hmm.
we can pretend it was fate or great planning that got us here, but I think when we look back, it was just little moments of like, all right, I've lost everything. Let's take another step forward that get us to where we are. So yeah, I think that's probably true of both of those characters. But yes, especially Helen and sort of finding her way in this story to confront who she is and what she's become and find a sense of self in her grandfather or in her relationship with her grandfather.
Rereading the story in preparation of this conversation, I was really struck with maybe the most heroic moment in the book actually belonging to Lilith in confronting
sure.
Barnabas
Yeah.
as the serpent attacks, and her fearing nothing or not fearing the serpent and wanting to just get those words out of her body and into his ears so that he understands the value of Helen. And what an awesome splash page we get for that moment too.
Oh my God. I think I told you this, but when I wrote that's issue 5, which is a random issue 5, and at the end of I wrote to Bilquis and I was like, this is the most beautiful issue I've ever worked on in a comic. I was like, I understand why it's a random issue 5 of this random thing, but I was like, I cannot. You could. I mean, there's some comics that are tied for it maybe, but I've never worked on a comic that's more beautiful than that comic. In terms of what Bilquis and Matheus did. You're 100% right. That's the climax of the whole thing, and the great sort of brave moment is not Othin's moment. It's not Barnabas's moment. It's not Helen's moment. It's Lilith's moment when with the sort of sea snake in front of her, she's the one who tells Othin, the truth that he needs to hear at that moment. And she's the narrator of the story, so that made sense to me.
And it also then ultimately prepares her for the war that she's about to experience too.
Yes.
And that's a heck of a thing that sort of looms over this book as well.
Yes, if we could ever do another 17 chapters, we would definitely do Lilith and the war in the Philippines. And sort of her experience and getting married and doing some of that. Yeah, I mean, Lilith is. I mean, she's the strength of the book. She's the moral center of it, and she just wants to be a piano teacher. Like she wants, she just feels, in some sort of like. Almost like Confucian is what comes to mind. Like she just has a duty to perform her job as best she can, and she sticks by that moral duty, and just that certitude is something that neither Helen nor Barnabas nor CK ever had in their lives. So like Helen's just dedication is something entirely new, and that's what makes the whole thing work. If the three of them were left alone without her, it wouldn't work, because she has the thing that they lack, which is commitment, which is the idea that people can be connected and that you fulfill commitments, and that's what comes through.
And I think because we're introduced to Lilith as an old woman in the first issue and we fall into her story, we think of her as a wise person, but then we're reminded later on that she's actually not that much older than Helen. She's barely out of her own childhood and experiencing these things.
Yeah, I feel like she's like late 20s, and Helen's, when she starts 16 and ends at like 20 and ends the book at 19 or something like that. So yeah, I think Lilith goes from at 27 to 30 or something. Yeah. So she looks like she's had some more years. She's actually worked for a living, so she looks like she's has some more mileage there. But she's relatively young.
Back then, though, that age was also older.
Yes, it was. Yes, don't forget Howard died at 30. So
yeah.
Read those Conan stories; they're fairly wise, and you're like, why would I take a 26-year-old seriously? Like,
yeah,
you don't want to think about that. I was just reading Saturday Night Live. Lorne Michaels was 30 when he did the first Saturday Night Live.
Yeah,
that's
crazy.
That blows my goddamn mind. They're like, yeah, have an hour of television for 50 years.
Yeah, my grandfather was 23 at D-Day, and you're just like, oh, okay.
And he was one of the older dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 23. Jesus, veteran. I can say, I was the second youngest CIA officer, I think, like in a generation. So I was when I was 23, I was in Iraq and stuff, so I can at least claim that I was doing something with my life. I don't know.
There's this moment where Lilith at the end is talking to Helen and saying, I'm not going to get the whole quote correctly, but
How dare you? I want
woo,
word for word, or I'm walking.
you're the story of your parents, and then your children will carry on your story, right? And she does have children, and her story does get carried on, but also her story is trapped in these tapes that may or may not ever be listened to. And I look behind you at this amazing collection of
Her
comics
story
and
makes
artwork.
no sense. There's nothing else in the universe that
Well,
and
it's gibberish,
it's
right?
it's her talking about this magic world, and there's not even like portals to the magic world. You just like walk there, so her story. I mean, Lilith could have made up this whole thing just because she was drunk and
Woo!
with this guy. So like, there's
Yeah,
no
but we
guarantee.
know it's truth because we have
That's
Bilquis's
right.
art.
That's true. Yeah, we know it's true. Yeah,
We know it's true. But it gets, put away. Gets, it spends some time in an attic. It spends some time in a teenager's bedroom. It spends some time, God knows where, after this story. And I've been thinking a lot about artifacts that just live on a shelf and disappear. I bet you there's some behind you. I know there's some behind us.
sure.
And with the LA fires recently, and watching friends lose their homes and their collections, and thank God, they survived, and this is all just stuff. But people like us also know that this stuff isn't just stuff.
No, it isn't just stuff. No,
And
it's
yeah,
key. It's keys to things, especially if you collect original stuff. Yeah, I mean, I was a history major in college, and I remember going like into the library, into the stacks, and you'd find some little box, and you'd open it up, and there'd be like a children's book from 1872 that no one's looked at, and you're communicating with this like young boy, his little notes in there, and you're like, wow, this did if I, it's tree falls in the forest time. Like it's just the two of us and your story. That's all that exists at this point. Um, yeah, or I
it,
remember when my mother died. She died suddenly, so she didn't like organize her stuff or anything. We didn't know it was coming. Left her house one day, and now she's dead. And then you throw the funeral for her, and the singing is terrible. And you're like, if
Oh
only I had
no.
paid $250. um, uh, but so explore. We went through her house, and and to pack all the crap away. And there was like a locked trunk, and I pried the lock open because it was just plastic, and opened inside, and it was like all completely unorganized, thrown in there. It was like all the stuff she had found of her parents, because her parents had died suddenly, in this trunk, like her mother's like yearbook and all the just like the junk that she must have found, which is the exact same thing I did. And then I dug through there, and I found her mother's, my grandmother's, when she had to do the same thing for her parents. And it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as you go along, but like, and you realize like nobody cares. Like, my brother doesn't care about this. I'm the only person who cares about this ribbon that was made by my great grandmother back in 1908. And I was like, and it's just you and me. Like, your whole life is just this ribbon. That's all that's left of you, and I hold it.
but why does that matter for you and not your brother?
I don't know, probably because he believes in all sorts of, he believes more in the afterlife and all that stuff.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Because I am a person who, when my grandfather passed away, went through the house, and it's like, okay, well, I taking his knife, I'm taking
Yeah,
this
sure.
medal. Like, I love all
Sure.
the trinkets. And then when Lisa's grandfather passed away, and we got to see his catechism
Yeah,
book.
yeah. My dad took his catechism. No, this was his dad's catechism, and there's just pictures of just like guns.
Yeah, like
and
hand-drawn guns and planes that some 12-year-old drew into this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like to me, like that's worth gold,
Yeah.
but not to all of your siblings.
Not to all of my siblings. But we're sentimental fools, and I believe in the sacredness of like objects and stories and all of
Dude,
that.
so am I. Yeah, no, I mean, you look behind me, and you'll find, like, here's my it's probably from that. But like, here's like the picture of my grandparents in the war. If you can see that. And a letter my grandma, and I don't know what other bizarro little, a letter my mother wrote her father where she calls him the name that we named my son after.
Amazing.
And then my grandmother raised me because I was, my father walked out when I was young, so my mom worked all the time. So, and she collected swans for some reason. So I have a swan in every room in my house, a little pet swan. So yeah, I believe in the power of objects. I don't know if that's true or anything, but yeah, I believe in them.
When we get to that section in Helen of Wyndhorn where you are your parents' story and your story will be carried on by your children, and I go, well, I have no kids.
Oh, you're fucked. You're fucked now.
So it's the podcast.
It's my story. It's my story. And then Tom King will carry on. I'll tell people about you, Brad, when you're gone.
Literally today.
Oh no.
He was going through we were looking for something, so he was going through the long boxes, and he goes, I can't wait until I die so someone can go through my collection and see how cool it is.
Ooh, that is some vulnerability that you just put out in the world.
No, I get it. If you're a collector, and I am a collector, and anyone who has this sort of thing where you have that gene of like, nobody is gonna care about this stuff, and I'm just gonna die, and it's gonna be. My father collects books. He just collects random books. And he lives out in New Mexico, and he's retired now, and all he does is just organize his books all day long. And he must have 20, 50,000, but I don't know, like thousands, like you go in his house and it's just, you're like, oh, you have a problem.
Yeah.
And he calls because he's 80 years old. So he calls me and he's like, when I die, you're going to have all these books. I was like, I don't want anything to do with your 20,000 books. But I tell my kids, like, you're not going to want anything to do with my 50,000 comics and art and lobby cards and all that stupid stuff I collect.
We have a ton of nibblings, and we're like, okay, well, we have to stay cool because we want them to want our stuff.
I've already decided that they're not cool enough for my comics, Lisa.
Because one of them is really eyeing our Criterion collection.
Max can have all the Criterion discs that he wants, but I need to find someone who, when they discover Richard Corbin's Rolf, they're like, whoa, he's got Rolf. Damn right, I've got Rolf. I need to find that person.
But to me,
I think I have Rolf. I think they sent it to me
because it's great. Yeah, there's a new edition. Dark Horse is putting it out.
Yeah, I think I got a new edition. I haven't read it, so Rolf is worth reading. I got to dig into that.
It's awesome.
All right, I'm into Rolf.
One of my favorite moments in Helen of Wyndhorn is when Lilith is like Thomas is sitting at the table and he's going like, what the hell am I gonna do with these tapes? I can't possibly use this. And she goes like, well, I've left out some stuff, so you can come over tomorrow and I will kind of fill in some of the gaps. And she's like so pleased. And I think Brad going through his comics and going like, oh man, when I'm dead, somebody's really gonna have a treat. We all just like to be reminded that we are interesting. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I think to me, Lilith is kind of like a call to action. I have no desire to be a leader or a warrior or even a great artist or writer, but the idea of being adjacent to greatness and seeing someone else's greatness and going I can do that in a small way. You know what I mean?
Are you saying I for Lilith or I for you?
I for me.
You have no desire for greatness? I don't believe a fucking second of. I've seen you guys hustle on the Comic-Con floors.
I'm writing.
You are lying through your teeth.
I have zero ambition, and I am writing Brad's coattails.
That's not true.
It is 100%
Lisa, okay. We wrote this. This is disgusting to say in front of Tom Spring, but we wrote our first scripts together, comic scripts together last year, and they're going to get published this year. And
look at you!
Happened.
Look at you! Oh my god! Now I have competition. Did my page rate just go down?
What just happened? No, it's a one pager, Tom. And it's a 7-pager.
One pager. That's where I live. I live on one pagers.
It's illustrated by Scott Morse.
That's true.
We're going to be on a table of contents with Stan Sakai.
It's in
Cannot wait.
this ink runs cold.
Yeah,
It's very fun.
You fancy pants. I've never been on a goddamn Stan Sakai book.
Well,
I think it might be personal at this point.
but when we wrote those and we completed those, you're like, we need to do more of this.
Yeah, it was definitely.
That's ambition, Lisa.
I think that was less ambition and more of an in your purpose kind of moment where like it was fun. It was
in your
exhilarating.
purpose.
Yeah,
what's in your purpose? This is an expression I'm unfamiliar with.
So I got it from you, and it is when there might be a dragon flying around and a guy wielding a sword, but no matter what's going on, you're gonna stand there and do what you're there to do. So for like Lilith, like it was to stand up for Helen, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter what else was going on in the world. She was going to do that thing and she wasn't scared to do it. Like, that's what working with Brad is like. I'm getting choked up, but that's what working with Brad is like. It's like, it's easy. It's fun. It's exhilarating. You know, it's scary around the edges kind of
I
thing.
hate to tell you this, but that is ambition. What you have to
the part that I don't like to do is the emailing and talking to people. Like, I like this talking
We're
to
literally
people.
talking right now. You have a smile on your face. This is all fake. Oh my God. I knew it. You're dying inside.
I don't do any of the emails.
All email comes from me.
Sorry, that's your I don't want to be a great person. If it
involves,
wasn't for the emails,
if it involves correspondence, I'm not into it. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Hey,
oh my God.
I'm not going to read all of the DMs. I just won't.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I'm terrible at emails. No, as you guys probably know. Yeah, no, I get constantly. No, but I think, but can I just say a person who is determined will often ignore the correspondence because that's always secondary to your determination. You want the end point. You don't want the bureaucratic middle point.
Yeah.
At least that's what I say to myself when I ignore my email.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm
right.
I'm amazed that we went here. All right.
First we did funerals. Now we're
our life.
Congratulations on your story. What's your story about?
It's called The ADHD Detective.
Nope. We changed the title.
Wait a second.
It's called The ADHD PI.
Oh, The ADHD PI.
I already love it. That's a great title. I like all the letters. ADHD PI.
Yeah, and so it's about this detective.
Hi friends, Brad here. I had to stop for a second. Lisa explains the entire plot of the ADHD PI to Tom, and it's only a 1-page story, friends. We're like super proud of it, and we don't want to give away all the goods, all our small goods right here on this episode. So if you want to know what the ADHD PI is truly about, buy the book and be on the lookout for the Kickstarter, which should be launching soon from Scott Morse. It's called This Ink Runs Cold. We're in it. Stan Sakai's in it. Brian Michael Bendis is in it. Michael Allred's in it. So many cool people are in it. All the stories are illustrated by Scott Morse. Okay, back to Tom King.
Oh man, that's hardcore. That's the problem being ADHD PI.
Yeah. I don't know what could have possibly inspired it.
So I tell some people write their truth, but you're better off just making it all up. You do well, yeah, just going out on the limb, and not writing what you know, pure fantasy.
Yeah. Oh man,
that sounds excellent. 1-page story is impossible. I've done 2 or 3 of them, and they're awful. I had to do for love. The love is love. I remember, and I just could not think of anything. And finally, Mitch just drew a random thing, and I put dialogue on it because I was so just distraught I couldn't think of anything on the page. The only person who's really good is Brad Meltzer. Brad Meltzer can do a good 1-page comic. If you ever look at those like Marvel 1000 ones and stuff, he knows how to do. That's his like superpowers. 1-page comics.
But we got bit. We got bit. The magic of seeing a script be turned into a comic is kind of miraculous. So we want more of that.
It's the best thing in all of art. As someone who's made or has written for novels and TV shows and movies, and there's nothing better than comics and that experience of getting made.
As the consumer, we agree.
We agree.
There's nothing better than comics.
Is there anything we haven't covered on Helen of Wyndhorn that we'd want to talk before we release Tom?
Oh, we should talk about the color. Matheus Lopes
Yeah.
is brilliant, and I said Bilquis is brilliant. It's the art is undeniable. This is an art book. It's like Human Target. If you read Human Target, where the art leads and I follow. That's what this book is.
I mean, and you know how to pick a collaborator. That's one of your great skills. And
I got very lucky.
When you have a partnership like this, you got to want to continue it, right? And when you finished Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, you were already on them. You're like, okay, what can we do next? Have you had that conversation already for after this one?
Oh yeah, no, she knows but I don't think this is anyway serious. Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow was written on sort of a normal schedule where I think it was 8 issues, and she probably took a year and a half to draw this. I wrote this right after Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, and she took 3 to 4 years to draw it. So she's been on this for a long. I mean, and it's in the pages. She left nothing on the floor. And so right now she's like, "Can I just breathe?" I was like, "Yes, please."
Fair.
Breathe.
It's a perfect book. I was talking to Brad before we sat down, and I was like, it's the kind of story where I am like so entirely satisfied. Like the book is just like so good and complete to me. I'm like, I can't imagine. I have no questions. Like, I have nothing to ask, because I'm just like, the book did it for me. Like, it really did it for me. So thank you to you and your whole team.
That's very sweet. And Bilquis and I are about to go through a thing. I don't think either of us know what's on the other side with this Supergirl, with them turning our graphic novel into a movie. So we have no idea what that's going to do, whether it's just like a normal day or whether it's like I don't know. We have no idea. It's somewhat unprecedented in both our lives.
Yeah. Well, the excitement already is extremely intense just based on one frame being released.
Yeah, I'm over the moon. I can't wait.
Tom, thank you so much for hanging out and chatting.
My absolute pleasure. You guys are amazing. This is an audio podcast?
It is.
Oh, so you've yielded this weapon the whole time. I'm describing this as the visual thing. You've had a weapon in your hand. I assumed you were going to murder Brad at some point.
Oh, it's a crochet hook. This is my other purpose.
Oh, that's
constantly crocheting. I'm not afraid right now, for I am crocheting.
Well, I'm glad to see you didn't murder Brad and that you're just crocheting. Unless the crocheting is just to cover up the murder, which sounds like your next one. Oh my God. So you don't murder him with the thing. You murder him with the thing you're crocheting.
That's right.
Not when we're recording.
That is better than an ice pick that melts. That's the best. Where did she get that? Where did she get the murder weapon? She made it.
He never listened to the Wu-Tang Clan. You got to protect your neck. Put the scarf. She's going to get you.
Oh my God. You knew it was going to come back to haunt you when you chose to get up a Wu-Tang. You didn't know it was your murder.
Bad. Bring the ruckus on that note.
What a pleasure, y'all. Thank you so much. And thank you to your audience.
And I want everyone to know that Lisa is still crocheting right this very second.
The same project, but it has way more surface area now.
Please don't murder me, Lisa.
I won't, probably.
At the same
Though
time...
I am the most likely, aren't I, statistically?
Statistically, you are the most likely to kill me. And also, like, if you do kill me, that just speeds up the process of people discovering my rad comic book collection.
Everybody's getting what they want.
Man, again, thank you to Tom King for hanging out and staying up late to talk Helen of Wyndhorn. The hardcover is out now from Dark Horse Comics. Pick it up.
I still insist that I have no ambition, because I feel like at the heart of ambition is a deep-seated sense of discontent. Like this idea that I have to fulfill something where I feel like
think that's true.
I feel like ambition is like a drive, and to me, I'm happy to if this is okay, it's two-sided. I'm going to say the thing that makes me look good, and then I'm going to say the thing that makes me not look good.
All right.
I feel like if things just stayed, if I got the exact same recognition that I get right now from the podcast and doing my singing thing and, having my students, I'm happy today.
You would be satisfied.
I'm super satisfied
We've
right
talked
now.
about that on the podcast in the past, and that is something that I also suffer from. I call it poisonous contentment.
Yeah.
Like, it does get in the way of me pursuing my
Pushing.
dreams and
Yeah.
pushing myself.
We don't push ourselves.
At the same time, thanks to the podcast, I have discovered that there is an area of creativity that I can explore a little bit more, and it has brought me back to writing. And in bringing me back to writing, I do want to write more, and I now do have an ambition to see more comics written by us made.
Same.
That's called ambition, Lisa.
Yeah, but like I don't know, like maybe it's like my like Catholic guilt thing, where like I go like to have ambition is to like have some kind of like that there's something toxic at the center of it.
Yeah,
maybe I don't know. The thing that
Like
makes
pride.
the thing that makes me not look good is like if I had ambition, wouldn't I have accomplished way more by now?
Well, but I think maybe we're discovering some ambition. All right,
Maybe.
and I feel the same way. My dad refers to me as a late bloomer.
Yeah.
He brings it up all the time, and I cannot stand it. I
Yeah.
hate the phrase late bloomer, to the point where I have not been able to read the Carol Tyler book called Late Bloomer that's been sitting by my bed for a year.
Yeah,
Because I see the term late bloomer and I go, ugh. But at the same time, I think there is something to my dad labeling me as a late bloomer. I wish I had the ambition that I currently have when I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'm like ambitious, but I would not deny myself some ambition.
We do want to achieve things.
Yeah.
And we both, clearly, we're talking on a microphone right now. We could just be having a private conversation. So clearly we have the, like, I need to be seen. Need to be seen gene. But, like, this is also a thing, like, in high school, like, where maybe it's like a little bit of rebellion too, where like, do you remember when you were applying to colleges and they were always
Sure.
like, you have to show your leadership qualities.
Yep.
And I insist that I do not have leadership qualities and I don't want leadership qualities. I make a really good second in command, making it happen. Tell me what you want. I will, my people pleaser.
But you said second in command. You didn't say pawn.
Yeah, I don't want to be a pawn. Because then I won't have the opportunity, like, to really aggressively fulfill someone else's dreams. I like to fulfill someone's vision, and then someone tells me I'm a very, very good girl.
I think we're working on Lisa's ambition. I think that's what
Perhaps.
we've discovered.
Perhaps.
Thank you to everyone who has hung out this long to the end of this episode. It is always a delight to talk to Tom about whatever comic he is working on. He was on last year talking about Black Canary, Best of the Best, and that book has only gotten better with each issue.
Yes.
The last issue in particular was just phenomenal. I love what he and Ryan Sook are doing. Jenny Sparks, I think, is going into some places I just was not anticipating, and I've been really enjoying that. But yeah, Helen of Wyndhorn is something special, and it all comes down to that collaboration that he has with Bilquis Evely, Matheus Lopes, and Clayton Cowles, and him talking about how, like, yeah, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow was on a little bit of a regular schedule. It took Bilquis a little over a year to accomplish, but with Helen of Wyndhorn, that's 3 years of Bilquis's attention, and as Tom says, it shows on these pages. And we just got the hardcover in the apartment today. And I mean, I'm in awe of this book.
It's really, really yummy.
And it is a little weird how when I was reading it in singles, I was enjoying it, but I wasn't clocking all the threads. Like, especially, like, I wasn't really tracking the the stories within the stories, and it wasn't until I reread it in preparation for this conversation that I went, oh, I think this is, I mean, it's definitely my top 5 favorite Tom King written stories. I may even like it more than Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow.
It's a great second read.
Yeah.
It is such a good second read. And I think part of that is because you are freed from the anticipation of engaging with a trope. And like, I think like trying, like casting your mind forward in a story is like so tremendously distracting. And being able to really sit with it the second time and read it with full momentum.
Yeah, and knowing who all the characters are, right?
Yeah.
Like, and now being able to go, oh, look what's going on over here with Barnabas. Oh no, Lilith's the true hero of this story.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
love it.
she just wants to be a piano teacher, Lisa.
Who doesn't? And that's a perfectly fine life.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm just eagerly anticipating all the new Helen heads that are going to happen this month.
Embrace it. It's such a great. That's what we're called. No second thoughts. No second ideas.
Yeah. Okay.
So we are going into March Madness. I'm
We're in
coining that phrase right now,
yeah.
and it refers to our programming this month. So what do we have coming up on CBCC?
So next week, Rob Williams is returning to the podcast, but this time he's bringing Arthur Wyatt with him. We are talking about Judge Dredd: A Better World, which is a hell of a thing to read in 2025.
You will feel bad.
Yeah, I like Judge Dredd is not doing its thing if you're not feeling a little bad all the time while you're reading it. And I think that Judge Dredd: A Better World is one of the best Judge Dredd stories of the last decade, maybe the last 20 years. And it was fun to get real grimdark with Rob and Arthur. And we've recorded that conversation. It's a fun conversation. We've recorded all our conversations already that we'll be publishing in March. So let's go ahead and talk about the back half of this month. This is the biggest month of the year so far for Comic Book Couples Counseling. The third week will bring the debut appearance of Matthew Rosenberg onto the show. He's discussing his new Image Comics series, We're Taking Everyone Down With Us, which is not a James Bond story, but is also not a James Bond story.
There is a very hairy chest in it.
Oh, I almost spoiled something, and I resisted myself. Stop, Brad, stop. Let's move on to the final episode of Comic Book Couples Counseling in March. Junie Ba is coming back, and we've spoken to Junie Ba about a great many books, but we've never spoken to him about his Monkey Meat anthology series, and that series has just returned this week with the summer batch. You may have noticed that we have a pull quote on the first issue.
Ooh.
I think it is the first masterpiece of 2025.
It is. He let us read the whole thing, which
we've
was
read all 5 issues.
Extremely generous, and it is so freaking
Like,
good.
I loved Volume 1. I thought it was just Twilight Zone cranked to grotesque political horror of the now.
I thought you were about to say that it was Twilight Zone and Crank 2. Maybe it is. It kind of is.
Maybe it goes a little high voltage, but the summer batch, like Junie Ba is really pushing his cartooning, and it's like what's the word when you love something already and then it just tops itself and then tops itself and then tops itself?
I think it's first comes love, then comes marriage. Then comes having Junie Ba's baby.
Yeah, I heard what I said. But yeah, so Junie Ba back on the podcast talking about Monkey Meat, the summer batch. Pick up that issue when you're picking up Helen of Wyndhorn in hardcover. And we will also probably have a bonus 5th episode in there too. But I don't want to say who that is yet because we have not recorded that conversation just yet.
We have another very cool announcement. We have big summer plans.
Yes. So we did acquire our San Diego Comic-Con tickets. We will return to that lovely city for our favorite con on the planet. But we wanted to do something a little different, a little special this year. You may have been following us on our socials at CBCC Podcast and noticed that Lisa and I are trying to hit up 50 comic book shops in 52 weeks. We've actually already hit up 17 comic shops.
But we are running out of places that you can hit up in a weekend that are within driving distance.
Yeah. So we thought, well, what if we rented a car and drove from Virginia to San Diego and stopped at various comic book stores along the way and documented it all.
We're doing a road trip.
We're doing a comic shop road trip, and it's still very much in the early stages of planning. But our friend Mark Jackson, the UK cartoonist, has drawn up an event poster for us, and you can get stickers of it and coffee mugs and t-shirts if you like by going to our TeePublic page.
And we want to hear from you. What's the cool comic shop in your town? What's the shop that we cannot miss? And if you throw in a great place to get tacos, I mean, yeah.
We know for sure we're going to visit Metropolis and go to the Superman Museum, and we want to go to Denver and hit up Mile High Comics. We've never done that before. But beyond that, we are game for anything. And if your shop owner wants to do a little video with us, do a little short interview with us, let us know about that too. Point us in their direction. We want to reach out. On the Patreon, we've been doing free episodes talking to retail warriors about selling comics in 2025. Our first episode was with Eric Jones of Four Color Fantasies in Winchester, Virginia. Our second episode was with Aaron and Zach from Now or Never Comics in San Diego. And in a couple weeks, we're going to be talking to Patrick from Challengers in Chicago. And we're going to be doing those episodes once a month until the end of time, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And we are looking for sponsors for this road trip.
Yes.
So if you have a store that you want to promote, or a Kickstarter, or anything at all.
A new comic.
Yeah.
Like we're looking for sponsorships for this road trip. We will put your ad, read by us or read by you, in our main feed episodes. Just hit us up, cbccpodcast@gmail.com.
Other plugs behind the paywall of the Patreon. We are gallivanting through the green. We are reading Saga of the Swamp Thing one issue at a time and going in depth with our listeners. So we're doing just the more run. And so we're into issue 21. We've only done, this is going to be our third episode.
Yeah.
So it's a great time to jump on.
Yeah, but already they've been a lot of fun, and revisiting Saga of the Swamp Thing in a book club scenario is just like, it's such a treat.
And then if you want to hang out with us in person, why not meet us at the movies? We have our next comic book film club selection for March, co-sponsored by Four Color Fantasies. The movie is Josie and the Pussycats. This is 3/9, March 9th at 5 o'clock.
It's this Sunday. You only have days to get there.
Patrons get in for free. So if you are a patron, do not go to Alamo Drafthouse Winchester and demand your free ticket. You have to reach out to Brad and or Lisa, and we'll get that for you. Okay, Brad, I am getting antsy. I have got to get out of here. You wouldn't happen to have any dead people's teeth on you, would you?
I got a couple.
Where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
You can find me on most social medias at Mouthdork, although I'm pretty much spending all my time on Blue Sky these days. If you have words of affirmation for our logo, send them to Jesse Lonergan at Jesse Lonergan on Blue Sky, or on Instagram, Jesse.Lonergan. Lisa, where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
I'm always accepting words of affirmation at Sidewalk Siren on some social medias. If you'd like to spend more quality time with us, you can subscribe to us on Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, Audible, Apple Podcasts, or whatever app you choose. We are everywhere. If you'd like to get exclusive, you can join our Patreon, where you'll get more content, including weekly bonus episodes.
If you'd like to reach out and touch us electronically, you can email the podcast, cbccpodcast@gmail.com. You can visit our website, comicbookcouplescounseling.com, or follow us on all the socials at CBCC Podcast.
If you'd like us to touch you physically, you can wear our merch. tpublic.com/stores/comic book couples counseling divided by hyphens.
You could give us the gift of 5 stars on Audible or Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to do an act of service, why not write a review or leave a comment on the show while you are there?
We are fluent and receptive in all 5 love languages. It really warms our hearts and helps the pod.
So until next time, friends, keep your love tank full.
And your psychic rapport open.
Doopy-doopy.
You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson. Why is this already funny?
Because the way that you were, it just was.
Okay.